Hello there and welcome to The Value of Everything. Today we are looking at the news. Before we start though, please check out Brave browser. I don't get any kickbacks for this, but it's got already enabled ad blockers and it stops the trackers. You got privacy, extra security, and I think it's pretty much using the Chrome technology or the coding behind it because it was a bit more open source and it's just adapted it for a little bit more of your security. So please check it out. So what's in the news today? Now, in the Brisbane Times, they're talking about marriage equality. We need freedom from religion, not freedom of religion. So again, I think the whole issue here is the fact that really should the state have any involvement in what people do in their day-to-day lives? People should be able to get married, but really if you want to participate in a religion, it's really your choice as long as you're not affecting anybody else, but it's not necessarily the government to dictate what you should be doing, especially if you're running your own religion. And it's kind of like a culture. People want to create their own little microcosms of cultures, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we need to have more of a system where marriage is really revered and protected. It's not sort of this new modernized thing where people just spend lavishly on a big marriage and then get divorced over a couple of years. So it's a strange angle whereby after the vote happened in Australia, now it's looking at like how this vote is going to change because it's quite open-ended, and I think that this is probably one side from like the more liberal side instead of the conservative side as to how we're going to change the environment of our culture. But I don't really think like government should have a very hands-off approach to how it should be affecting people's lives, and unless it's really detrimental to the greater good. So check out that article because that will probably frustrate you to quite a lot. Next up, see a lot of these articles that are coming through now are very like extreme in terms of how they change our culture. Now Victoria is just a state in Australia. It's not the entirety of Australia itself. But when we're looking at voluntary assisted euthanasia, it's there's some big issues with this because really, if you think about it, a lot of people in society now, that basically if you're over 60, most of them have got all the wealth, and the youth haven't. And what do the young people want to get? They want to get like the inheritance. Well, they don't want to get it, but it would be nice to have. And there's always going to be some people that don't necessarily have good family bonds, and they're susceptible to I can't wait till my parents drop off, then I'm a rich person, that kind of stuff. So as soon as you look into things like euthanasia, there's a lot of grey lines. Maybe you can get a kid to sort of say, look, your life's not really worth living. You can start to explain to them that your quality life is not great, it's not that great. Maybe we need to look into voluntary euthanasia for you. Persuade them. These people are getting older and losing their faculties as well, so there's a lot of ethical issues relating to voluntary assisted dying. And then also you could think to yourself, why would the government want this at the same time? Well, an old person is not productive anymore. You want to pop them off, so you just want to keep and maintain the productive cattle. And what's the point in paying for these oldies? So be very wary of this. It really is a very tough decision, and unless really somebody can just kick quite happily kill themselves if you give them all the weaponry to do that. But in this situation, it's very yeah, the people are very persuasive, and you can, and obviously when there is this big power of assisted dying, and there's a lot of dangers involved, particularly when the state gets their way and gets very involved in this. Lie loans. Next up, if you're not aware, there's a lot of issues with the Australian property market. This may be the start or the beginning of a lot of the unwinding of the debt expansion. If you remember, there's in the GFC there was a lot of loans made out to people that were not that very creditworthy. Same thing again is happening to Australia, but they're just lying on their documents. It's exactly the same story, just rehashed. Now, funny enough, when I was looking for an article, I couldn't find anything mainstream, and I got the Conversation. Maybe it is a fairly decent website, but you would expect something a little bit more mainstream, like Sydney Morning Herald and all the other news article places to find this information, but really, this is very sparse about this lie loans, and NAB's been coming out with this news recently. I think you had a research by UBS explaining about how a lot of these people who are applying for these loans are non-documentation, self-submission, and then because there's so many disconnects in society, it's not necessarily the bank manager with the person who's applying for the loan. It's so many different steps. You've got different companies that quickly assess the credit rating. You've got broker agents who are working as mediators between banks and between the person who's applying. So all of these little steps are open to corruption, particularly when there's self-certification and people are not actually asking for the correct documents. I mean, think of it in any other sense in the world whereby you apply for a job and you've completely lied on your resume. It's just a joke. So when it comes to something as important as house prices, how all of this excess of credit has been pumped into the housing market, we'd never even monitored this because we didn't even have house price inflation in our inflation figures. We wasn't assessing it. It's just a total, like, every single step, everything's been perfectly placed to pump up the valuations of the housing market. But obviously this credit expansion is debt. Once these people, we're really getting to the end of this bubble whereby people are lying on their loans, people are finding themselves pressured to get involved into the property market. People are trying to. The funny thing about this is that, well, it's not even funny. It's really it's pretty sick. Whereby the predators now are really seeking for people to get involved into the property market now. So they're looking for people that are really easily susceptible to buying a property, especially on the new builds, and trying to really hard sell them into this. So it's really coming to an end, and obviously the government doesn't want this to happen because nobody wants this shit to happen on them on their watch. But it really, at some point, somebody with who was a bit tough as nails. In the old days, there were tough politicians. There's no politicians that are tough enough to actually come out and speak against this stuff. So, and that's the political party system. You've got one party and you get out into towing the party line. So it's a horrendous system, and we're only beginning to see the start of this unwind. If you see the amount of cranes that are being built, everyone's trying to rush to build as many properties as possible, get them out to sell. But as we're seeing, the first early warning signs of this is happening. Back over to house prices are accelerating, but leaving London into the cold. Now, I think maybe something on this, the view of this in London is that there's a little bit of an exodus of people in London outside, and there's a couple of factors which are happening, and I think this applies to most places in most major cities in the world. Firstly, London is far too expensive. It's always been a rich person's playground. I think cities are a bit of a... They're such a hard thing to manage, especially if you're trying to run a family or keep a family going, pay your bills. You've got the rush of the traffic. You've got inflating house prices. You've got to have two people working. It's just a stress-filled life to live in London and to do that. Now, if you're a young person, you live in a small little poxy flat and you can go out at night, it's still a good place to live. But essentially, it is a rich person's playground. So you're a crazy person if you're just trying to make ends meet. And I mean, there's things to do. It's a little bit interesting, but there's no peace in your life. It's just continuous, like, hectic lifestyle. And people are just finding a way out. And as you get more people realising, hey, I can do all of this. I've got an office job. I can work online. Let's get out of London. And then you've got the immigration factor as well. Like, the immigration is just going crazy in London. You get communities sprouting up anywhere, and it really isn't even anything to do with... Like, you don't even feel like London is anything to do with British culture or British society. It's just this globalised city that it doesn't really mean much. There's no real sort of... The roots are being sort of taken from the deep part of it. So... gradually, London is being sort of eaten from the inside, and it's inevitable how this migration out of London to other places are happening, and maybe we'll see a new capital city sprout up on the back of this. Next up, Robert Mugabe. Hey. I think he's way into his 90s now, and you think to yourself, I couldn't even... I thought he might have even changed the president, what is it, the Prime Minister, President, whatever they are in power nowadays in Zimbabwe. But you'd think he would have been exiled, moved out by now. But he's still maintained power for a very long time. But when you're way into the 90s, your faculties are starting to diminish somewhat. And it just shows that really sometimes the power of your mental state is the thing that holds together the control of your country at the same time. And it's faltered to its own undoing. He's been a hard man. He's been trying to knock out anybody who speaks against him, but the military force eventually took over. But I guess for the people that are watching this, they're just saying, look, there's one faction who had all the guns being taken over by another faction who's got all the guns. It's interesting how Zimbabwe's getting very popular with Bitcoin at the same time. I think their market went up. Like the price of Bitcoin went up to 10,000, even more, just on the exchange level in their area. So it's interesting how African countries are embracing things like Bitcoin, probably even more so than places like Europe, just by the fact that they do have economic situations that force them into these places. These things are a little bit irritating. Anything where you got some kind of box which is listening into you and monitoring your every move, I've kind of outright refused to have these things. I know that your mobile probably does this anyway, but I really don't want some kind of AI thing just sitting in my room, just listening to me and I speak back to it. I used to love all these gadgets. all the time, and I'll be the first person to buy it. But I'm really liking things to be very simple, less fuss. I don't want too many Bluetooth and microwaves flying through the house. I just want I'm happy to pick up a book and read a book nowadays. It's really too much just having all this technology bullshit. And as soon as you get self-dependent on this technology to give you information, then you lose something. You lose part of your mind. It's like how somebody who doesn't use a second language, they very quickly lose it after time. And I know that there are benefits of having Google to your voice at any moment, but there is something about being disconnected to this internet world, having your own thoughts, having your own mind, and being detached from this every once in a while. Just even if you spare 10 minutes of your day just to think over your own thoughts, it's really too much to just have somebody listening on key, instant gratification all day, 24 hours of the day. I mean, I used to get bored as a kid. Now there's no chance to get bored, so I don't like this for also privacy reasons as well. Who's got access to this information? Could somebody use it against you? You bring over a friend, you offer your opinion on something, maybe it's controversial, maybe your employer finds out about it, maybe you get sacked. I don't like all these microphones and cameras watching you everywhere. It's too much, and as I say, you're pretty much accepting your own enslavement. You're getting yourself involved into something which initially makes you feel quite happy, but over time it's just degrading you as an individual. Can business become part of the blockchain world? That's an interesting thing. This is a very big question as to, a number of things. So I think we're currently in a situation where fiat money is collapsing around us as we speak. When we look at a Bitcoin chart, which I've got one over here, we see this meteoric rise in Bitcoin, which is crazy. But it's not necessarily about Bitcoin. We've got to think about what is this being compared to the US dollar. And rather than like seeing this flip, seeing this chart like this where it's a complete upward curve, maybe we're looking at something which is the end of the US dollar. Maybe this is the main conversion currency into the new global currency. So now with the business world as well, there are all these new companies which are coming online in a more of an unregulated market where the youth can quite happily pay into tokens. They can see the blockchain in front of them. They know how many are in circulation. They know that the encryption methods and everything in the mathematics prevents any corruption. And I think over time we're going to find out that there's a lot of corruption which is happening in most financial markets where things are being sold. There's only being oversold. So there's a lot more shares out there or tokens to a bar of gold than what there actually is. There's a lot less profits. There's a lot more debt on balance sheets than what we realise. So an actual environment where businesses are actually starting off from fresh. There's a youth movement behind it. There's going to be a massive convergence in the business world into these markets, and you're seeing that the businesses that are controlled by fiat money systems and regulated by governments are really going to be very slow. The reason why a lot of these massive businesses exist is because they can get to the government to pass them laws to keep them in power, so they can make it very hard for the barriers to entry for other small businesses. Now, if there's something if there's a new platform or new system where new companies can circumvent the regulation, obviously it's going to be subject to a lot of fraud and everything else, but it's going to be a massive challenge to the fiat business world. And I think we're not even seeing it just yet, but we're going to see a massive change whereby these tokenized companies, these ICOs, I know a lot of it's fraud, but there are going to be some big players that are going to be sprouting out from that world. And if you think about it, the fiat system business world, they're using share buybacks, they're really just putting crap onto their balance sheets just so that they pump up the share price for a couple of minutes, so they can get their performance fees, and it's just the corporatocracy just going to shit eventually. Whereas decentralized ownership, meaning that everyone has a part to play in the ownership, everyone's got a part to play in the responsibility, everyone has got a part to play in the loss as well. Corporatocracy, the profits are privatized, the losses are publicized. Well, not publicized, but the public purse has to foot the bill. So as we're definitely going to get another crash. It's just a matter of time. But are we going to see that there's going to be a big transfer of these fiat money systems going into the blockchain world? And you can see that they're not necessarily capable to do that conversion because of the way that they have to run in a system where the biggest draw for them is the regulatory power. But in a decentralized world, it's very questionable. Why free movement of people is crucial for innovation. Now, I guess you couldn't deny that, and I would be always for a world where there is freedom of movement, but obviously that is subject to a community's choice as to whether somebody should enter into their community or not. People should choose who should come and go. That hasn't happened in any community because the community is just so large, because it's a massive country now, so nobody gets a choice as to who they can choose to associate with. It's just this big mishbosh of all these people nowadays, but there's not really much vetting. I'm all for freedom of movement, but there's got to be some kind of choice in that. But I think this is probably going more down the line of how countries are becoming a little bit more, you could say xenophobic, but they're becoming more protectionist in terms of, we're realising that if you continuously have this mass immigration to your country, there are people that are competing for the low wages. That has a natural effect of lowering the general wages of the population, and it's an old trick. You increase the GDP figures, you increase the productivity of the nation somewhat, and you can issue bonds and loans, so the governments do fairly well out of mass migration, but the citizens, the people who are part of that country and really want to live and improve their living standards, are just, it's a rip-off. You're getting mass populated countries, you're getting roads filling up. It's not a great lifestyle. That's why the mass migration out of the cities are happening, and you're getting this hyper competitive job market where jobs were plentiful in the old days. Like you could leave one job and then go to another. There were even, like when we talk about low doc loans, there was no docs in terms of getting jobs in the old days. Now you need university degrees, all these things to just get your foot in the door. So freedom of movement is very a subjective thing in this paradigm of big national governments. It's not very good for the people. However, in the terms of a community making choices as to people that want to come in and out, people have just got money, they want to spend it, well, welcome in. People have got skills, they've got things to add to the community, they're a nice person. welcome in. And then you're going to see these communities flourish, and people are going to just say, I really want to be a part of that, and work harder to become a community. What is a community nowadays? It's just, there's no choice in it. It's just by freak and chance we're living next to each other, and I've chosen to move into this area. There's some kind of mild thing of how expensive one house is compared to another, but there's no community choice. There's no real integration. We can't say, I know some people say, talk about the community and stuff like that. There is very minimal community cohesiveness in society, regardless of anywhere you go into in the West. So be very wary of these titled news articles. And finally, will blockchain unchain the world? Now, I think that's again a little bit of a loaded question there, but what we're thinking about is possibly saying, are we going to have problems with this blockchain? Is it going to unravel the fiat money system? Is blockchain or Bitcoin the problem, and we've got this great fiat system and everything's going fine and hunky-dory, and this is just a disruptive mechanism which is going to bring us to the edge? I wouldn't say so. This is really a technology in which it's a lifeline, basically. It was invented in 2007 during the crashes, and maybe it's controversial, maybe it was created by the NSA, but we've got to think in a way that it was, this is open source. This is totally exactly what the political ideology is of the actual movement of decentralizing power, decentralizing the oppression. It really, to frame the blockchain as to being anything that's going to destroy the country or destroy the nation is like, what's an analogy to use? It's like, I don't know, just saying we're marooned on an island, and then a lifeboat comes along and saying, "Oh no, that's terrible to our situation. We were doing fine beforehand," and it's like, probably a bad analogy, but you get my gist. It's, if we didn't have this technology at this time in our lives, and what would have, maybe what was our backup to the fiat money system? Maybe we could start collecting precious metals. Maybe we could, I don't know, hope and pray that the SDR, the special drawing rights of the IMF, is really a great idea. But always throughout history, we're always worried about these things, about these massive. As soon as they become bigger and bigger, you got more power, you got more corruption. So it's going to be hard. There's no doubt about it that the collapse of the fiat money system is going to be tremendously the worst thing that we've probably ever encountered, especially because we're quite a spoiled generation. I think none of us have really, and we're all getting to an age now where none of us has seen that much hardship in the world. None of us have been enlisted to go to wars. And unfortunately, I'd rather have a lifestyle which started bad and then got gradually better, but in some ways it was okay, and then it's just gradually getting a little bit worse and a little bit worse as time progresses. But it's like if you can think about our lifestyle and our lives right now, it's like a movie set. Everything starts normal at the start, gradually gets worse, and then heroic times happen where people have to speak up, people have to do trustworthy, noble acts, virtuous acts to get through hard times and find a way out on the other end. And maybe we don't even find a time to get out on the other end until we're way into our 90s, but it may be that's probably only the case for us. I'm prepared to suffer. I know we've had a very, or maybe not quite so much as you, but it's been a very materialistic lifestyle. It's never really quite satisfied me that much. So bringing us down to a level where we do have to cooperate and work with each other on a system which operates on individuals being in control of their finances, not having a bank being custodian of your finances and letting other people manage your own affairs. We are really trying to take and give ourselves our own empowerment, and with that empowerment we've got to really work on our trust with each other and being a good citizen in our communities. So thank you very much for your time. Always a pleasure. If you can like, subscribe and share, it'll be very much appreciated, and I'll be back again for more.